As we live in a nation that began with the acknowledgement of God's truth, that went through a terrible war of judgment and tragedy in which hundreds of thousands lost their lives, the bloodiest war in the nation's history ever. There were those who understood that that was a judgment that was required in order to end the scourge of slavery. But slavery, my friends, had at least this advantage. The objective of slavery was not the destruction of the slaves. Slave masters would even go to great pains to make sure those slaves were alive and well and kicking so they could work out there in the fields. We get on our high horse today, don't we? There's so many people that will discard the founders because they own slaves. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but who's going to discard us? We're killing babies. We don't want to look at the truth. We stand on no high moral plateau in our time. We are in fact plumbing depths of depravity unknown to our ancestors. And whatever may have been the evil in which they engaged, at least they were willing to acknowledge the principle by which their evil was condemned. We have even turned our back on the principle. We've got to look seriously, because I wish I could say that this was just all fun and games. You go out, you give some nice speeches, you go, you have votes, the bands play, we have elections. It just goes on no matter what. Hasn't been the case, though, not in this country and not in this world. We stand at the end of the 20th century, looking back on years marred by the worst holocausts and slaughter in the history of humankind that came upon civilizations that had prided and preened themselves on their science, on their philosophy, on their humanity, and had ended up performing evils more depraved than any seen in human history. What makes us think we're immune? What makes us think that we can go on playing with the fire of our scientific knowledge, turning now down paths that confront us with the possibility not just of hurting and destroying the human body, but of manipulating human nature itself, providing us with a material power that goes well beyond the imaginings of the wicked conquerors of the past. What makes us think we will be immune from the ultimate abuse of all this power if we surrender the principle that holds the conscience of power in check and that assures even the weak and helpless and vulnerable amongst us against its worst abuses? And that is what the Declaration's principle represents, but only when we respect its substance. To mouth the words is meaningless, for the words have no heart or soul once we have destroyed our respect for the will of God and our fear in conscience of the judgment that comes when we transgress that will. And so we have as a people. And the interesting thing to me is that the judgment comes and we're bringing it on ourselves. It's one of those things that I think is reflective of the truth, that we can go so far thinking that it's somebody else's fault when we get in trouble. But then we come to a moment where we are faced with the truth that that trouble comes upon us because we are willing to make the wrong choices even when the right ones are available. And I think that that's a sign as well. It's part, I guess, of what keeps me going out here, because I kind of figure from my little reading that there are times, and sad to say, if you think about it hard for America, those are the times the day before judgment. I mean, like the angels wandering down to Sodom just before they were destroyed and things of this kind. There are times when folks are impelled to go out and without regard to any reaction, without regard to whether the polls are up or the polls are down, without regard to victory or defeat, without regard to whether this media person likes what they say or that politician condemns, you're impelled to go out and to stand in the good times and the bad, with the good reactions and the bad, in the crowds of thousands or in the rooms with only a handful, and do only one thing: to bear witness to the truth that God is the foundation of all human justice, and that as we abandon that foundation, we abandon this nation's hope. We abandon this nation's destiny. It is clear. Now, I believe that that's very clear in practical terms. If you walk, for instance, through the events of the last several years, and I know that it's not fashionable anymore to refer to these events. Would you allow me a little aside here? Because I can't get into this particular subject without talking a little bit about the current state of mind in some quarters in the Republican Party, which state of mind really strikes me as impressively blind to the truth. Because we're in a situation, aren't we, where we have been through several years, and we faced during those several years a failure and betrayal of moral stewardship at the highest level in our nation's life, like nothing we have ever seen before in American history. And the worst of it wasn't just that the present occupant of the White House lied and violated his oath and assaulted the integrity of the judicial branch. The worst of it wasn't that we had somebody sitting in the White House, obviously, without the integrity required in order to do the job for this country. The worst of it was that after many months of hemming and hawing and lies and cover-up, when the truth finally hit the table, when it was all clear and all documented and all understood, the Senate of the United States lacked the integrity to do its duty and perform its oath, and left him. And they left him and they left Bill Clinton sitting in a job he should never have had, proving that he wasn't the only one guilty of perjury up there, since every senator who voted to clear him violated their oath as well. But what we have to do, though, see, because I think we have to ask ourselves, though, given the nature of our government, you end up with a president who doesn't respect his oath and a Senate refuses to call him to account. Before you start, any of us start looking at that and beating them over the head and saying what terrible leaders they are and how that reflects on them, and all we've got to do is get rid of them. Yeah, we are still living in a country, aren't we, where every once in a while we got to go into that voting booth. There's not a single person sitting in the Senate of the United States, and there's nobody ever darkened the door of the White House that didn't get the suffrages of the American people to put them there. And that means that if we end up with a government that has no integrity, we better turn around and look ourselves in the heart to ask what has become of our own. The surrender of our moral principle clearly has practical effects. I remember even during that whole impeachment business, you watch what is going back and forth, and at times when I was on the air then doing my radio show, and people would call up, and some of them would be quite outraged because they knew that there were things on the table, including things that have, I think, subsequently been even more confirmed about the administration's surrender of our secrets to communist China, the transfer of technology that's helping to build up a new adversary that can threaten our cities and our lives in the course of the new century. And they would look at things like that and they would say, why aren't they being called to account for that? Why is it about all this sexual foibles and all this personal stuff? And though I thought the question sometimes justified, I thought we, instead of asking, why doesn't that, we ought to take a good hard look at what might be the truth that God is trying to communicate to us through this. Maybe it is precisely in order to draw attention to the fact that the loss of our personal integrity leads directly to the loss of all integrity in our system of self-government.